The cowboy ordered a mail-order bride, but they delivered a girl twice his size. The sun was setting over the dusty plains of Redwind, painting the sky in streaks of orange and crimson. Jace Callahan sat on the porch of his small ranch house, his boots dusty, his hat tipped low over his eyes. He had lived on this frontier world for nearly a decade, surviving storms, wild beasts, and isolation that could make even the strongest mind fray. Out here in this human colony on a distant planet, life was raw and unfiltered. Every day was a test, every decision could mean life or death. And yet, despite all his hardships, Jace had never been lonely in the way that gnawed at the heart, the ache for companionship. That ache had led him to a decision he'd barely dared to hope for. Through an old network that connected Redwind to Earth, he had ordered a mail-order bride. A human woman, someone who could share the loneliness, someone who could laugh at his dry humor and maybe even ride out the harsh storms with him. The idea of a gentle, soft-spoken woman arriving at his doorstep seemed almost unreal after years of solitude. He leaned back in his chair and watched the horizon, imagining the arrival. Maybe she would smile at him nervously, offer a soft hand, and tell him she was ready for this new life. Maybe she would like the ranch animals or the rough charm of a cowboy on a dusty planet. A loud clang from the landing pad snapped him out of his daydream. A crate had been delivered, not the usual supplies, food, tools, or replacement parts, but a large, reinforced container marked with unfamiliar symbols and the holographic insignia of the shipping AI. Jace squinted. This had to be it. He grabbed his crowbar and stomped down the porch steps, dust flying behind him. His boots crunched against the hard dirt as he approached the crate. It was bigger than any shipping container he had ever seen on Redwind, tall and sturdy. He wiped his hands on his pants and activated the crate's opening mechanism. With a hiss and a mechanical whir, the lid lifted. At first, there was silence. Then a deep voice broke through. "Hello," Jace blinked. He didn't expect a voice. He didn't expect the size of the human inside. The figure inside the crate was enormous, at least twice the height of any normal person he had ever seen. Broad-shouldered, muscular, with arms strong enough to lift one of his prize Redwind cattle with ease. And yet, despite the intimidating build, the eyes were warm, intelligent, and curious. I think there's been a mistake," Jace stammered, taking a step back. "No mistake," the figure said calmly, stepping out of the crate with surprising grace. "I am Lyra." "You ordered a companion, yes," Jace's mind spun. This was not the delicate, petite woman he had imagined. This was something else entirely, something powerful and human. Somehow, Lyra was human, yet nothing about her was ordinary. I mean, yes." But he gestured helplessly to her size. "You're twice the size of anyone I've ever known." Lyra tilted her head and smiled faintly. "You wanted someone strong, resilient, able to handle the challenges of a frontier planet. That is me. Is there a problem?" Jace swallowed hard. He had expected someone fragile, someone he could protect. Instead, he found himself standing before a human who could probably protect him. His jaw tightened. The pride of a cowboy, of someone who had faced storms and beasts alone, bristled against the thought of needing help. And yet something about Lyra's calm confidence, the certainty in her stance, made him pause. "Well, I didn't exactly expect this," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Expectations are often wrong," Lyra said simply, stepping closer. Her boots left firm prints in the dust, and her gaze swept over the ranch like she had been born to understand it. "I adapt." Jace had to admit, he was impressed. He hadn't even begun to imagine what she was capable of. The first few hours were awkward. Jace showed Lyra the basics of the ranch, how to feed the animals, how to check the water supply, where the tools were kept. Lyra observed everything silently, her movements precise, almost mechanical in efficiency. Every step she took seemed to make the ranch feel smaller, yet more secure. "Do you always work like this?" Jace asked. noticing her methodical way of stacking hay bales twice as fast as he could. "I adjust to the environment. Efficiency is survival," she replied. Her voice was steady, unwavering. By sunset, Lyra had moved more hay than Jace had in a week. The animals, initially wary of her size, seemed to accept her presence quickly, nudging against her hands and shoulders as though sensing a protector. Even the cantankerous red-winged goats, known for biting strangers, stayed close to her. Jace felt a mix of awe and unease. Here was a woman, or something more than a woman, capable of feats he had only dreamed of, and yet he couldn't shake a feeling of displacement. His life had been built on self-reliance, on doing everything alone. How could he adjust to sharing it? But the night brought no easy answers. As the twin moons of Redwind rose high, a low growl echoed across the plains. Jace froze. The alien predators were out. Large, sinewy creatures, blind but keenly aware of vibration and sound, prowled the outskirts of human settlements. They were dangerous, fast, intelligent, and deadly. Lyra moved to the edge of the corral, her stance relaxed, yet ready. "They are not a threat to me," she said. Jace stared at her. Not a threat. He didn't know whether to laugh or panic. These things they can be dangerous, but danger is only a problem if you are unprepared. Watch. Within moments, Lyra had grabbed a long, reinforced pole from the shed, its tip sharpened. The growl drew closer, and the shadows of the predators slinked along the fence. With precise movements, she swung the pole, knocking one of the creatures back before it could attack. The others hesitated, as if sensing her strength. Jace could only gape. He had faced predators before, but none like this, none he could fight alone. And yet, here was Lyra, moving with a calm that belied her enormous size, protecting the ranch and the animals as though it were second nature. After the predators retreated, Jace approached her, shaking his head. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Lyra replied, brushing dust off her shoulders. "You wanted help, that is what I provide, adaptability, strength, survival." Jace exhaled slowly. Somehow, despite his pride, despite his initial shock, he felt a spark of relief. Maybe this could work. Maybe the loneliness that had stretched for years could finally be filled. And maybe it wouldn't be filled in the way he had expected, but in a way far stronger, far more capable than he could have ever imagined. As the night deepened and the stars blinked cold and distant, Jace sat on his porch once more, watching Lyra move through the ranch, adjusting the fences, checking the animals, humming softly to herself. He felt a strange mix of admiration and apprehension. This was not the life he had imagined when he ordered a bride. This was something else entirely, something bigger, stronger, and alive in a way that made his heart race. And deep down, he knew, this was only the beginning. The morning sun rose slowly over Redwind, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. The twin moons of the previous night had disappeared, leaving the sky a pale blue. Jace Callahan leaned against the porch railing, sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug. Lyra was already at work, moving with a quiet efficiency that made the ranch seem alive in a way it hadn't before. "Jace," she said without turning, "the water troughs are low." "I can fix it, but you might want to watch," Jace frowned. "Watch, I can handle that myself." Lyra tilted her head, her dark eyes observing him like a teacher studying a student. "You can, but if efficiency matters, you'll watch," Jace grunted. He knew when to argue and when to let it go. Today, he let it go. Lyra strode to the water tanks, her massive hands gripping the tools like they weighed nothing at all. In minutes, she had repaired leaks, refilled the troughs, and even reinforced the fence posts. The animals moved around her without fear. The red-winged goats, which usually darted nervously at strangers, nudged her hands and even allowed her to scratch behind their ears. Jace watched silently, feeling a strange mix of admiration and frustration. This woman, or something more than a woman, was beyond what he had imagined. Twice his size, stronger than any human he had known, and yet gentle when she chose to be. It was humbling. "Not bad," he muttered, tipping his hat. Lyra glanced at him and smiled faintly. "You could say the same about your sunrise coffee. Not bad at all." Jace shook his head. He didn't know whether to laugh or feel challenged. Maybe both. By noon, the first real test of their partnership arrived. The small frontier town, a cluster of metal and concrete structures not far from Jace's ranch, sent word that alien wildlife had been spotted closer than usual. Farmers reported missing livestock, crops destroyed, and eerie howls that kept them awake at night. Jace tightened the strap of his holster and nodded toward Lyra. "Looks like we're not the only ones adjusting to each other." Lyra nodded. "I've seen these creatures before. They test boundaries when they sense weakness. Let's make sure they don't see ours." When they rode into town, Jace felt the curious eyes of the townsfolk on them immediately. Whispers followed them down the dusty street. "Is that the man with her? She looks strong enough to lift a horse." Why would anyone need someone that big? Jace's jaw tightened. He didn't like gossip, but this was Redwind. News traveled faster than wildfire here. Lyra noticed it too. She didn't respond to the stares, but she moved with a quiet authority that made the murmuring townsfolk step aside. Her presence commanded respect whether they wanted it or not. The town's mayor, a wiry man named Carson, approached with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "Jace, you brought someone new, huh?" "Yes," Jace said cautiously. "Lyra. She's helping me with the ranch." The mayor's eyes went wide. "Helping? That woman, well, she's more than a woman, isn't she? She's enormous." Lyra stepped forward, towering over the mayor. "I am here to assist and to protect. Redwind is not safe and humans must adapt." Carson blinked. "Adapt, right. Well, that's reassuring." Jace could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was trying to figure out where Lyra fit in. Most had never seen a human like her, strong, confident, unafraid of the alien dangers that lurked outside their town. And yet, Jace noticed something. Despite their initial doubts, none of them dared to question her capability. The real challenge came just before dusk. Jace and Lyra were inspecting fences near the edge of town when the low growl of predators echoed from the cliffs. A pack of alien creatures, larger and more coordinated than anything they had seen before, was moving closer to the human settlement. Jace readied his rifle, scanning the shadows. "We can't let them get into the town. Not again." Lyra nodded. "Agreed. Follow my lead." With a speed that belied her size, Lyra sprinted ahead, placing traps along the paths the creatures were likely to use. Jace followed, using his knowledge of the land to anticipate their movements. The predators were clever, circling, testing, sniffing for weaknesses. When one lunged from the shadows, Lyra caught it with her bare hands, twisting and redirecting it harmlessly toward a reinforced cage they had set up. Jace's jaw dropped. You can do that." "Adaptation," she said simply, securing the trap. "Strength alone is not enough. You must predict, anticipate, control." Jace grinned despite the tension. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. The townsfolk watched from the safety of the buildings, murmuring in disbelief. "She's saving us," one whispered. "And he's letting her." Lyra glanced at Jace. "We work together, that is what humans do." Jace nodded, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. This was more than partnership. This was survival, cooperation, and maybe friendship. The night passed with occasional bursts of alien attacks, each repelled by the duo's teamwork. Jace provided cover, taking shots when needed, while Lyra used her strength and speed to corral the predators. By dawn, the town was safe, and the predators had retreated. Carson approached again, this time with a smile. "I'll admit, I didn't believe it at first, but you're a team. Redwind is lucky to have you." Lyra bowed her head slightly. "We only do what is necessary to survive." Jace clapped her on the shoulder, careful not to hurt her with too much force. "Necessary, sure, but impressive as hell too." The townsfolk began to look at Lyra differently. Where once there was skepticism, now there was admiration. She was not a mistake, not an oddity. She was human, and in this harsh world that meant everything. Back at the ranch, the quiet of the night was a welcome relief. Lyra tended the animals while Jace repaired a broken fence, their movements synchronized despite being so different. "You know," Jace said, leaning on the post, "I wasn't sure about all of this, but today I get it. You're not just some replacement or gift or whatever I expected. You're you." Lyra looked at him, the faintest smile on her lips. "I am Lyra, and you are Jace. Together we are stronger, that is all that matters." Jace nodded, feeling a strange pride. Stronger, yeah, I like that. For the first time since he'd ordered her, he didn't feel fear or doubt. He felt partnership. He felt hope. And he admitted quietly to himself, he felt something more. Something he had thought long dead in the dusty corners of his heart. Curiosity about what life could be like with someone like Lyra by his side. As the night deepened and the stars blinked cold and distant, Jace realized that this was only the beginning. The frontier was harsh and dangers would come again. But with Lyra's strength and his own experience, they could face anything. Humans had survived for millennia by adapting, by being clever, by supporting one another. And here on Redwind, that truth was clearer than ever. Lyra moved to the edge of the porch, scanning the horizon, her silhouette massive against the night sky. "Tomorrow," she said, "we train, we prepare. Redwind will not be easy and neither will the challenges ahead, but we will face them together." Jace leaned back in his chair, a faint grin on his face. "Together," he echoed. "Yeah, I like the sound of that." And as the twin moons of Redwind rose once more, bathing the plains in pale silver light, Jace knew that his life had changed forever. Not in the quiet, gentle way he had imagined, but in a way far stronger, far wilder, and far more human than he could have ever dreamed. The morning sun rose slowly over Redwind, painting the dusty plains in pale gold. The twin moons had disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the sky a clear blue. Jace Callahan stretched, feeling the familiar ache in his back from yesterday's labor. Beside him, Lyra moved silently, tending to the animals with precision and care. Her massive hands handled the Redwind goats with a gentleness that surprised him every time. "Jace," she said, not looking up, "today we need to check the western perimeter. I noticed some tracks near the cliffs. The predators may be scouting." Jace sighed. "Western perimeter, huh? You know that's the worst part of the ranch. Those cliffs are treacherous." Lyra's dark eyes met his, calm and unwavering. "Treacherous only if you ignore danger. We do not ignore it. Follow me." Jace nodded, feeling a thrill he hadn't felt in years. Every day out here was a challenge, but with Lyra by his side, the challenge seemed almost exciting. They rode out on horseback, the animals moving steadily across the rough terrain. Lyra's enormous frame barely fit in the saddle, but she balanced effortlessly, her movements controlled and confident. Jace kept glancing at her, still amazed by her strength and agility. As they approached the cliffs, the tracks became clearer, deep impressions in the red soil, claw marks along rocks, the telltale signs of the alien predators they had fought before. Lyra dismounted, her boots crunching against the dirt. "They are testing the perimeter," she said, crouching to examine the tracks. "They are smart, they adapt, we must be smarter." Jace nodded, studying the tracks with her. "Looks like a small pack, maybe 5 or 6. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Small packs can be dangerous." "They hunt together, coordinate, we need to prepare." Jace frowned. "Prepare how? You mean fight?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she scanned the cliffs and surrounding terrain, her mind clearly working through a strategy. Finally, she spoke. "We do not fight blindly. We anticipate, we trap, we survive." Jace felt a surge of admiration. Her words were simple yet precise, every word mattered, and she wasn't just talking. She was planning, already thinking of ways to protect both the ranch and the town. They spent the morning setting traps along likely paths of the predators. Lyra moved with incredible speed and strength, dragging heavy logs into position, sharpening stakes, and reinforcing fences. Jace worked alongside her, using his knowledge of the land and animals to anticipate where the creatures might strike. By midday, the traps were ready. The sun beat down on them, making the red dust rise in clouds around their boots. Jace wiped his brow, impressed by how much Lyra could do. She had barely paused for water, yet her movements remained controlled and efficient. "You don't even get tired?" he asked, panting slightly. Lyra glanced at him, her expression neutral. "Tiredness is a weakness we can control. Focus and discipline overcome it." Jace shook his head, smiling. "Discipline, huh? I guess that's one way to put it." As the afternoon shadows lengthened, the first sign of danger appeared. A low growl echoed from the cliffs, followed by the sound of claws scraping rocks. Jace's hand went to his rifle, but Lyra held up a massive hand. "Wait, let them come. Watch their pattern." Jace hesitated, but he trusted her. The predators emerged from the cliffs, moving silently and cautiously. There were 5 of them, sleek and muscular, with dark, glimmering eyes that seemed almost intelligent. They paused, sniffing the air, circling the traps. Lyra stepped forward, her massive frame towering over Jace and the animals behind her. "Now," she whispered. In a coordinated move, Lyra triggered the first trap. A log swung down, knocking one predator off balance. Another stumbled into a pit camouflaged with dirt and branches. Jace fired his rifle carefully, taking down one more before it could reach the fence. The remaining 2 predators lunged at Lyra. She caught one midair with astonishing strength, twisting its momentum to send it crashing harmlessly into a reinforced cage. The last one froze, sensing it was outmatched, then slinked back into the shadows. Jace stared, his heart pounding. You're incredible." Lyra released a sigh, almost amused. "Incredible is not the point, survival is." After the predators retreated, Jace and Lyra surveyed the area. The traps had worked perfectly, and no animals were harmed. For the first time, Jace felt a sense of true partnership, not just in work but in survival. "You know," he said, leaning against a rock, "I never thought I'd see someone handle those things like that. You saved the ranch. You saved the town." Lyra looked at him, her expression softer now. "I do what is necessary. Humans survive because they adapt." "You survived alone, but now you are not alone." Jace felt a warmth in his chest. It wasn't just admiration. It was trust, respect, and maybe even something deeper. "Yeah, together," he said quietly. The next few days passed in a rhythm of work and learning. Jace taught Lyra how to ride the faster horses, how to track animal movements, and the subtle signs of an approaching storm. Lyra taught Jace how to anticipate predator behavior, how to use his environment as a weapon, and how to adapt when things went wrong. One evening, as the twin moons rose high, Lyra sat on the porch beside Jace, the silence between them comfortable. "You are different," Jace said after a moment. "I didn't expect this. Not just your size, but you." Lyra turned to him, her massive form silhouetted against the moons. "Different is what humans need to survive. You must accept change or you will fail." Jace chuckled softly. "I guess I'm learning that." Lyra's gaze softened. "Learning is survival, but trust is strength." "You trust me, Jace?" Jace nodded, meeting her eyes. "I do, more than I thought I could." Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but Jace felt its weight, not physical but emotional. For the first time, he realized that strength wasn't just muscles or skill. It was connection, trust, mutual respect. Their bond deepened as the days went on. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the plains, bringing high winds and heavy rain. Normally, Jace would have faced it alone, securing the animals and the ranch. This time, Lyra was there, moving alongside him, her strength making the work almost effortless. The wind howled, bending the weak fences and tossing dirt into the air. Jace struggled against a loose panel, and Lyra stepped forward without a word, lifting it into place with one hand. "We are stronger together," she said, steadying the fence. Jace laughed, drenched and exhausted. "Yeah, I can see that now." By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch intact. They sat together, muddy and wet, watching the stars. "You know," Jace said, "I never thought I'd be this happy, not in a long time." Lyra glanced at him. "Happiness is not a guarantee. But survival is something we can control, and you are learning that." Jace smiled. "I think I'm learning a lot more than that." A few days later, an urgent message arrived from the town. Another predator pack had been spotted, larger and more coordinated than the last. Jace and Lyra prepared immediately. This time, they weren't just defending their ranch, they were leading the effort to protect the settlement. As they rode toward the danger, Jace glanced at Lyra, her massive frame cutting through the landscape with ease. He realized that the people of Redwind were about to see something they had never seen before, humanity at its finest. Not weak, not fragile, but strong, adaptable, and unstoppable. Lyra caught his gaze and nodded slightly. "Together," she said. Jace grinned, feeling a surge of confidence. Together. The alien predators awaited, but this time Jace knew they were ready, not just to survive, but to protect, to fight, and to thrive. And he knew that with Lyra by his side, they could face anything the frontier could throw at them. For the first time in years, Jace felt truly alive. The dawn over Redwind was pale and cold, the twin suns rising slowly behind a haze of dust. The ranch lay quiet, almost deceptively so. Jace Callahan had risen before the first sunbeam, checking fences, water supplies, and the animals. Lyra was already moving among the goats, her massive hands steady as she refilled troughs and reinforced the weaker pens. "The tracks yesterday weren't normal," Lyra said, her voice low and steady. She crouched beside a patch of flattened soil near the cliffs. "Too many, too coordinated. This pack, it's different." Jace knelt beside her, studying the marks. He frowned. "Different how?" "They hunt together, but they also scout, communicate. Someone or something is leading them. It's not random, it's organized." Jace swallowed. He had fought predators before, but never one that might be commanded by intelligence. "So, it's bigger than us." Lyra's gaze was calm, but her tone held no doubt. "It will be if we underestimate it. We must prepare, not just for survival, but for defense." The town had already sent word of the new pack, larger than any before. Farmers reported missing livestock, destroyed crops, and strange tracks that led toward human settlements. Jace and Lyra rode into town to assess the threat, their presence immediately drawing attention. The townsfolk, once skeptical of Lyra, now stared in awe and relief. Carson, the mayor, approached with a worried frown. "Jace, Lyra, we're not sure what's happening. The creatures, they're not just hunting. They are planning. You need to see for yourself." Lyra stepped forward, scanning the horizon. "Planning or not, they will not succeed if we are ready. Gather the townsfolk, reinforce the fences, prepare traps, use the terrain. Humans survive because they adapt. That is all that matters." Jace nodded, his respect for her growing. "You think they'll attack tonight?" "Soon," Lyra replied. "We must act now." The afternoon was a whirlwind of preparation. Jace and Lyra led the townsfolk in strengthening the fences, digging trenches, and setting traps along likely predator paths. Lyra's sheer strength made the work seem effortless. She lifted heavy logs into place, carried water barrels across rough terrain, and even helped the weaker townsfolk reinforce their homes. Despite her size, Lyra moved with precision, coordinating every action. Jace watched, learning how she analyzed the environment, anticipating predator behavior and finding weaknesses that humans alone might miss. "You're amazing," Jace muttered, stacking logs beside her. "I am capable," Lyra replied simply. "You are learning. That is what matters." Jace shook his head with a grin. "Yeah, learning, sure, but you're doing all the hard work. Strength is not enough. Strategy is essential." By evening, the town was ready. Fires burned along the fences, illuminating the red dust and creating shadows that made the predators hesitate. Jace and Lyra stood together on a ridge, overlooking the settlement. The first growls echoed from the cliffs, low and menacing. "They're coming," Jace said, checking his rifle. Lyra's massive hands rested on the railing. "Yes, but we are ready. Observe, anticipate, act. Together we will survive." The creatures emerged from the shadows 10, then 20, moving with frightening coordination. They sniffed the air, scanning the ground, testing the town's defenses. Lyra crouched, her gaze sharp, and whispered instructions to Jace and the townsfolk. "Trap 1, left path, pitfall right, barricade the center, stay alert." The predators hesitated, sensing the traps. One leapt toward the fence, but a hidden log swung down, knocking it back. Another fell into the camouflaged pit. Jace fired his rifle with precision, bringing down a predator mid-leap. Lyra moved like a force of nature, intercepting the remaining predators. She caught one midair, twisting its momentum and tossing it into a reinforced cage. Another charged at her from the side. She sidestepped, using her weight to pin it to the ground, then hurled it harmlessly away from the town. The townsfolk watched in awe, their whispers mixing with gasps. "She's saving us." "She's not just strong," Carson murmured. "She's human, and more than that." The battle continued for hours, the predators relentless but predictable. Jace and Lyra worked together seamlessly, their actions complementing each other perfectly. Jace used his knowledge of firearms and terrain to cover the townsfolk, while Lyra used her immense strength and reflexes to control the creatures directly. By midnight, the town was safe. The predators had been driven back, their numbers thinned, their coordination disrupted. Jace and Lyra surveyed the scene, exhausted but victorious. "You see," Lyra said, her voice calm, "strength alone would not have saved us. Strategy, preparation, adaptation, that is what keeps humans alive." Jace nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "Yeah, and having you by my side doesn't hurt either." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile. "Partnership is essential." For the first time, Jace realized that survival was more than just fighting. It was about connection, trust, and using every resource, every human strength together. The next morning brought a grim discovery. A new set of tracks had appeared beyond the cliffs, larger and more organized than any before. Lyra studied them carefully, her expression unreadable. "They're coming from the north," she said, "and they're not just hunting, they are preparing. Something leads them, a bigger intelligence." Jace frowned. "A leader?" "Yes," Lyra said. "Something we cannot fight directly. We must use our minds, our ingenuity, our humanity." She explained her plan. They would lead the predators into a trap, a network of pits, barricades, and explosives scavenged from old mining equipment. Jace and the townsfolk would act as bait, drawing the creatures into the prepared zone, while Lyra used her strength and speed to control the battlefield. It was risky, extremely risky, but it was the only chance they had. As the sun set, the ground trembled with the approach of the predators. The horizon darkened with their massive forms. Jace felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear, but Lyra's presence steadied him. She moved among the townsfolk, giving instructions, lifting heavy objects into place and positioning herself where she would be most effective. "They are larger than before," Jace whispered. "They are," Lyra said calmly, "but so are we." The creatures entered the trap one by one, following the baited paths. Jace and the townsfolk guided them, firing strategically and using the barricades to slow them down. Lyra intercepted the leading predators, moving faster than Jace had ever imagined possible. She lifted, threw, and pinned creatures with a precision that made survival seem almost easy. Hours passed in a tense blur of strategy and action. By dawn, the predators had been neutralized or driven away. The town survived, intact, though the battle had taken its toll. Jace leaned against a fence, exhausted. "I don't think I've ever been this tired or proud." Lyra stood beside him, her massive form silhouetted against the rising suns. "Pride is irrelevant. Survival is all that matters, but you did well," Jace smiled. "We did well together." Lyra's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, together." As the town celebrated, Jace realized something profound. Humanity was not defined by size, strength, or weapons alone. It was defined by ingenuity, courage, and the willingness to trust one another. And in Lyra, he had found not just a companion but a partner, someone who embodied the very essence of human adaptability and resilience. For the first time since arriving on Redwind, he felt a spark of hope, not just for himself, but for the entire settlement. They had faced danger, worked together, and survived. And if they could do that, there was no challenge too great, no threat too powerful that humanity could not overcome. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her massive fingers surprisingly gentle. "The frontier is harsh," she said, "but humans are tougher. We endure, we adapt, we survive." Jace looked at her, then at the town, then back at her. "Yeah, we do." And for the first time, he knew that Redwind was not just a harsh frontier. It was a place where humanity could shine, stronger and more resilient than any alien threat, and that together they could face whatever came next. The sun barely touched the horizon, painting the Redwind plains in a dull orange glow. The air was thick with tension. Jace Callahan rode alongside Lyra toward the northern cliffs, where the largest predator pack yet had been spotted. This time, the stakes were higher. The creatures were not only larger, they were led by something far more intelligent than the scouts and hunters they had faced before. Something that seemed to think, to plan, to strike with purpose. "They call it the Queen," Lyra said, her voice calm but filled with focus. Her eyes scanned the rugged cliffs and dusty plains ahead. "She coordinates the packs. Defeat her and the others will scatter." Jace swallowed hard. "Queen, how big are we talking?" "Bigger than any we've faced. Faster, smarter, stronger, but she is still mortal." "Human strategy, ingenuity, that is the key." Jace nodded. He had learned to trust her instincts. Lyra's size, her strength, and her mind had saved them before. Now it would be tested to its limit. The town had been reinforced. Barricades, traps, and warning alarms were ready. Every able-bodied adult was stationed at strategic points, while the young ones were moved to the central hall. Carson, the mayor, approached Jace as they passed. "Are you sure about this?" Carson asked, worry in his voice. "The Queen, she's not like the others." "People are scared." Jace's gaze shifted to Lyra, standing beside him like a wall of determination. "We've faced worse," he said quietly, "and we're ready. She might be stronger, but humans are smarter. That's why we survive." Carson nodded slowly, though his expression was still tense. "I hope you're right, for all our sakes." The first sign of the Queen's approach came as a low tremor beneath their boots. The ground shook as massive creatures advanced, followed by a larger shadow moving with terrifying purpose. Jace's pulse quickened as he caught sight of it. The Queen. She was enormous, easily twice the size of any predator they had encountered. Her sleek black scales glimmered in the morning light, eyes sharp and calculating. Around her, the pack moved in perfect coordination, following every signal she seemed to give. Lyra stepped forward, her massive form blocking the sun. "Remember the plan," she said. "Traps first, bait second. Use the environment, adapt, survive." Jace gritted his teeth. He checked his rifle, adjusted his gear, and nodded. "Together," he said. "Together," Lyra echoed. The battle began almost immediately. The predators surged toward the traps, but the Queen was clever. She jumped over pitfalls, avoided the barricades, and countered every tactic with uncanny intelligence. One of the younger townsfolk trying to hold a barricade was nearly knocked over, but Lyra swooped in with her enormous hand, lifting the teenager out of harm's way with ease. "You okay?" she asked, setting him down gently. He nodded, wide-eyed. "Yeah, thanks." Lyra's eyes returned to the Queen. "Focus," she said. "Observe, anticipate, act." Jace fired at the advancing predators, picking off those that threatened the barricades. He worked in perfect rhythm with Lyra, who moved faster than any human should, intercepting creatures, lifting them and tossing them into reinforced cages. Each action was precise, a combination of strength, intelligence, and instinct. The queen advanced, towering above all, her eyes locking onto Lyra. Jace felt a chill run down his spine. This was no ordinary predator, this was a true challenge. Lyra didn't flinch. Instead, she assessed the terrain, noting loose rocks, the cliffs, and narrow ravines. She whispered a plan to Jace. "Lead her to the eastern ravine," she said. "The traps will slow her. Use the terrain, I'll intercept." Jace nodded, signaling to the townsfolk. They moved with purpose, herding the queen and her pack toward the ravine. The queen leapt, narrowly avoiding a pitfall, but Lyra was ready. She charged, her enormous fists striking with controlled force, redirecting the queen toward the traps. The queen roared, a sound that shook the very cliffs, and attacked Lyra directly. They clashed in a battle of strength and willpower. Lyra dodged, countered, and struck with precision. Each blow sent shockwaves across the ground. Jace fired carefully at the remaining predators, picking off any that threatened to flank them. The townsfolk watched in awe, their fear replaced by admiration. They had never seen humanity's ingenuity and courage displayed so clearly. The battle raged on for hours. Lyra's strength and intelligence combined with Jace's strategy, and the townsfolk's coordination slowly turned the tide. The queen, despite her power, began to falter as she fell into traps and was redirected repeatedly toward the ravine. Jace took a calculated risk. He climbed a small ridge and fired a special net launcher, one of the devices Lyra had instructed the townsfolk to set up. The net wrapped around the queen, slowing her movements. She struggled, but Lyra was ready. Using her massive strength, she pinned the queen momentarily, giving Jace and the townsfolk time to reinforce the trap. Finally, with one coordinated effort, Lyra lifted a heavy barricade and pushed the queen into a pit lined with reinforced metal. The remaining predators scattered, leaderless and confused. The battle was over. Silence fell across the plains. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the rising twin suns. Jace exhaled, feeling the weight of exhaustion and relief. He looked at Lyra, who stood tall despite the bruises and scratches she had taken. Her massive frame was still imposing, but her eyes held a warmth that made him feel safe. "You did it," he said, voice low. "We did it." Lyra nodded, her gaze scanning the horizon to ensure no threats remained. Together, humans survive because they adapt, because they trust each other, and because they endure. Today, you learned that. I hope the townsfolk did too. Jace smiled. They did. Everyone saw what humans are capable of when we work together. Carson approached slowly, his expression a mix of awe and gratitude. I don't have words. You both saved us. Saved the town. I don't know how to thank you." Lyra's gaze softened. "Gratitude is not required. Survival is enough. Humans endure, that is all." Jace placed a hand on her shoulder, careful not to hurt her with too much force. "And humans endure together," he added. The town celebrated their survival. The people had witnessed the strength, intelligence, and courage of two humans who refused to be defeated. Lyra, once the subject of whispers and doubt, was now a hero. The townsfolk accepted her fully, realizing that humanity's greatest strength was not in size or weaponry, but in resilience, ingenuity, and trust. Jace and Lyra returned to the ranch, the sun setting behind them in soft golden hues. They moved among the animals, checking the fences and repairing any damage from the battle. The quiet of the evening was peaceful, almost sacred after the chaos of the day. Lyra approached the porch and looked out over the plains. "The frontier is harsh," she said softly. "But humans are tougher. We endure, we adapt, we survive." Jace joined her, placing a hand over hers. "Yeah, and together we're unstoppable." She smiled faintly, her massive frame casting a long shadow in the twilight. "Yes, together." Days passed and life on Redwind began to return to normal. The ranch thrived, the town rebuilt, and the humans grew stronger, wiser, and more united. Jace and Lyra continued their work, training, and preparations, always ready for the next challenge. But they no longer feared the unknown. Lyra had become more than a partner in survival. She was a companion, a friend, and a symbol of humanity's resilience. Jace had learned that strength came in many forms, not just muscle or weaponry, but intelligence, courage, and heart. One evening, as the twin moons rose over Redwind, Jace and Lyra sat on the porch together. The ranch lay quiet, the town in the distance, safe and thriving. Jace glanced at Lyra, her massive form silhouetted against the moons, and realized that life on the frontier was no longer lonely. "You know," he said quietly, "I never imagined life could be like this. Dangerous, yes. Challenging, always, but alive, really alive." Lyra turned to him, her dark eyes reflecting the moons. "That is what humanity is, alive, enduring, adapting. And you have learned that," Jace smiled. "I have, and I'm glad I didn't have to learn it alone." Lyra nodded, her hand resting over his. "Together, always." The plain stretched endlessly before them, red and wild, full of challenges and dangers. But Jace and Lyra faced it all with strength, courage, and trust, humanity at its finest, unbroken and unstoppable. And as the stars blinked in the cold, clear sky above Redwind, Jace knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together.